I ended up calling the police on myself. The police show up, they have a conversation with my ex-husband, and they were like, she is not well, you need to take her to the hospital. I fought it every step of the way.
Are you from Philly originally?
Philly Burbs. Okay. Yeah, so right outside, maybe 20 minutes out. Yeah.
Bala-Cynwyd?
No, it's called Levittown. It's Bucks County, actually. So you're familiar with Bala-Cynwyd?
It's the only city I know on the outskirts.
Yeah. But my whole family's from Philly. They're all, I come from like just a blue-collar type, family. They're all from the city. They moved out of there when I was a little kid, and, I was born and raised in that neighborhood, yeah.
Awesome. What was growing up like?
Growing up was fine. I had two parents that were married. They eventually ended up getting divorced. I grew up with an older brother, and it was, middle class type of lifestyle for a while.
So with having an older brother, I have two older brothers.
Yeah.
Growing up, did you have, when I got into high school, the way was already paved with my brothers. And I feel like also, too, my parents smartened up significantly. So it was a very strict upbringing for myself.
Really?
Did you experience that having an older brother?
No, not at all. No, it was a total free-for-all for all of us. I didn't have any, I had an older brother, but I didn't really have him looking out for me. He was kind of looking out for himself. I was kind of left to my own devices. And when my parents got divorced, my mom worked a lot, to kind of hold down the fort and run a whole household. And I was a young teenager. He was like 18. He started dabbling into drugs and alcohol. And then I shortly followed that path at a young age. And yeah, times were tough as a teenager. They were tough. Yeah.
What would your friends describe you like growing up in high school?
Oh, man, I had it together for the most part. Like, I was a pretty good student. I was an athlete. I played soccer, basketball, and then I was a cheerleader. I used to be a gymnast. So I was kind of involved with a lot. I think because I was left sort of to raise myself, I was always just like this disciplined type of kid. And so I got pretty good grades, but then I met my boyfriend in high school, and that was the boyfriend that we ended up being together for 4 years until he passed away. So, yeah.
Do you want to unpack that a little bit, the story leading up to that?
Yeah. So, I met the love of my life. His name was Steve, and we were together for about 4 years. Then we were in a car accident. I was the only survivor. It was me, him, and my friend Brian. So they were ejected from the vehicle, and they didn't make it. And I was rushed to the hospital, and I found out that night, actually, that they didn't survive.
Oh, my God. I am so sorry.
Thanks.
And I feel like I'm cheating a little bit because I know your story. So I'm like...
Yeah.
So you had, I'm assuming you had some surgeries and whatnot. You went through a lot.
So I actually didn't have any surgery. So the car, it was an SUV, and it flipped 8 times. It was a total, freak accident of a car crash. We didn't hit anybody else. There was no animal. I really have no idea, what happened. He must have just lost control. So the car flipped 8 times. They were both ejected, but I weirdly had put on my seatbelt, 2 minutes before the car crash, which is insane. So they didn't have their seatbelts on, and here I am, we're going down the highway, and something, a voice in my head was just put your seatbelt on. And I'm like, I'm not going to put my seatbelt on, I'm in the back seat, I'm fine, I'm totally safe, whatever. And the voice got louder, was put your seatbelt on. So I'm like, what the hell? What's it going to hurt? Put my seatbelt on, and 2 minutes later, the car crashed. So if I didn't have my seatbelt on, I probably wouldn't have made it. Like I said, they were both ejected. They didn't have theirs on. And I found out later on in the hospital that they took scans. I didn't have any injuries. I did have injuries. I didn't need surgery.
Yeah.
Not enough injuries for all of that. I was pretty banged up, bruised ribs, a couple broken ribs on the one side, and just severe back pain that just wouldn't go away. So before I left the hospital, the doctor prescribed me some painkillers and sent me on my way. And that fueled an addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you can understand.
So you were prescribed, I'm assuming, Percocet,
OxyContin, Oxys, Xanax, to kind of help with the trauma of everything. And so that helped me sleep at night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and you were, I'm assuming, going to physical therapy, and if you don't mind
Yeah.
unpacking. And I asked this because I went through the exact same thing. I had surgery at 19, and I remember my doctor prescribing me painkillers, oxys, and I was justifying the quantities of pills that I was taking because a doctor was prescribing them to me. Now, I do believe in addiction. I do believe in, symptoms of deep-rooted trauma, symptoms being alcoholism, addiction, gambling, women, men, etc. Were you justifying it? Did you really know what you were getting yourself into when you were taking those meds?
That's such a good question because I had no idea. I'm a lot like you where I was like, oh, these were prescribed by a doctor. I started taking them. I had no idea how addictive that they were. All I knew is when I took them, I felt like I could actually somewhat tackle the day. Like I just was in pain from just being banged around, obviously tossed around. And it was so emotionally painful. Like here I'm grieving the loss of the love of my life and my friend. And so like just that alone, like it was hard for me to get out of bed. So here I have these prescriptions that the doctor gave me and it was an abundance of them. Like there was no shortage of a huge prescription at a very high dosage, right? So that just was something that I was able to justify real easily because here, like a doctor gave them to me. I felt like I was under medical care. I wasn't getting anything illegal off the street, so it all seemed justifiable. But not shortly after starting to take them, then I noticed that they were wearing off a little bit quicker, and I needed a little bit more to actually do its job. And so that just sort of fueled, several months in, it was just a progressive, thing. And I got stuck in that cycle for sure.
During the process following the accident, now you lost your best friend, you lost your boyfriend of 4 years at the time.
Yeah.
What was that grieving process like? And were you using the pills that were prescribed to you as a crutch to kind of help you cope?
100%. So emotionally, I could not handle it. I had no tools whatsoever in how to manage grief, in how to manage any of the feelings associated with that type of trauma and loss. I had absolutely no tools. I was already coming from somewhat of a background or home life that was a little tumultuous, so I didn't have, any experience with therapy or mental health services or anything like that. In fact, I came from a family that stigmatized it very much. They only looked at people going to therapy as you must be crazy. You have to either be, diagnosed with something seriously, or they just didn't consider that as an avenue to pursue. And so I never considered that as an option. So, I would talk about it with people, but again, I was under the influence and it was, it was tough. It was tough.
I feel like an accident like that, for anyone at any age to experience that, the trauma that comes along with that, and you're 19 years old, you had just graduated high school, people are still trying to find themselves, who they are as a person at that age. You're a kid at 19.
Yeah.
And you've been given, an endless supply of pain meds, and I think you said Xanax as well.
Xanax as well. And so that was super helpful when you were asking me about, how did that help you cope, not only physically, but on an emotional level, because I felt like it was so easy to numb. I didn't have to feel it as much. So the pain was so unbearable emotionally that it was hard for me to get out of bed. I started to lose the willingness to continue on. And so those pills, those prescriptions were able to help me just do that,
Were you experiencing survivor's guilt?
100%. 100%. So my friend's dad actually looked at me at my friend's funeral when I went there, and he says to me, "Why were you in the back seat? You shouldn't have been in the back seat. My son should have been in the back seat. You should have been up front," because my boyfriend was driving. And I thought, oh my God, he's right. And that what he planted, that seed in my mind. I remember leaving his funeral and looking at my dad. My dad took me. He was driving me. My arm was in a sling. Like I said, my, bones were all banged up, but nothing was broken. But anyway, I looked at my dad and I said, oh my God, he's absolutely right. Like, I should have been in the back. I shouldn't have been in the back. I should have been in the front. And had I been in the front, his son would still be here possibly. Automatically putting that guilt on me, like it should have been me to go and not the other way around. But that's in itself a whole other journey that you have to tackle when it comes to survivor's guilt. Like I often think about all the people that survived 9/11. It's like, how do you survive something so tragic? And obviously it's on a different scale, but survivor's guilt's survivor's guilt. And when you start to put yourself in that mindset of, oh my God, I shouldn't have been the one to make it, it's a very, very dark place. But people that are survivors of that, they are here for a reason. You did survive for a reason. It's not your fault, and that's something that took a lot of time, especially if you have no tools going into something like that. But yeah, no, I mean, it's you are, everybody here has a purpose. You're meant to be here for something. It's really hard to understand that at the time, but I know that 100%, I was here for a reason.
It's so ironic because you just talked about your experience with survivor's guilt following the accident. And then I hear a different narrative towards the end there, meaning, you were kept alive for a reason. So I'm hearing like a higher power or God in there. Yeah. And it's interesting how, like yourself, I'm sober as well. Once you implement that higher power into your life, and it's always perception and thinking and how we look at things.
Yeah.
That is the base of everything.
Yes.
And I could sit there and be in my head all day long and get very, very depressed very quick.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how, and I want to hear more about that in a sec. I don't want to jump ahead in your story.
That's okay.
But I'd love to also hear about, following the accident, you were being prescribed medication. What did it look like once the doctors, or did your family around you and friends notice? And then when did the doctor notice and cut you off from prescriptions?
Okay, so I hit it really, really well. Okay. I don't think anybody understood to the extent that I was using, if anybody knew at the time whether or not I would, or whether or not I was. I don't think they knew to the extent. I was very, good at hiding it, but I just continued to, seek other doctors that were able to prescribe me what I could get prescribed. I would run out. Like, you get creative with it, as you know. You're nodding your head, so you get it. Did my family know? I think they chalked a lot of my behaviors up to, this is just Nicole, like on a behavioral level. If they didn't know, I think that a lot of them just assumed that this was like trauma from the accident. And if a lot of people saw me drinking heavily, I don't think they understood to the extent of the pill misuse. So it was almost this thing like, a lot of people saw me under the influence. If my eyes were red or whatever, if I was acting that way, a lot of people probably, I'm assuming, just thought like, well, she's had several drinks. So that aligns as well, but nobody really knew to the extent of, how deep the addiction ran, really. Yeah.
That's also another problem with going through any kind of trauma. And at your young age, in the household that you grew up in, where therapy wasn't really something that anyone considered, it's, you're getting a pass, right? People are giving you the pass because of the tragic incident that you had experienced.
So true.
Meanwhile, it was creating this monster within you. So
true. Yeah, I resonate with that on the deepest of levels. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my addiction just continued to fuel, and I was in that cycle for 15 years, and eventually, I don't think that my brain could handle it anymore, and I ended up having a complete psychotic breakdown, and was sent to the psych ward. And not to jump forward a little bit with you, but you had mentioned earlier about a higher power and looking outside of us. When I left the psych ward and I came home, I realized that I had been so angry towards God, and I had just kind of shut that part out of my life. And 15 years sounds like such a long time. A lot of people throughout the journey would say to me, God, that accident was so long ago, like you're still talking about it. I don't think what people understand when it comes to trauma and addiction is that when you are using and you are numbing that part of yourself, you emotionally lock yourself into that time. You are not doing any healing. It's impossible. If you're just numbing yourself constantly, you're constantly under the influence of something day in and day out. It doesn't matter how much time goes by, you are stuck in that time. So it wasn't until, obviously, like in the psych ward, I decided at that moment, when I found myself in that psych ward, I realized I have a choice to make. And I have a son at this time, he's only 3 years old. And I thought, he is going to either grow up with a drug-addicted, alcoholic of a looking mother who's in and out of rehabs and psych wards, or I stop it now. It was a choice. I had to make that choice. I stop it now, and I never come back to this place. I turn my life around, and I stay sober. And in that moment is when I decided, this is it. This is it. I'm going to do it for him. And when you do that, I needed to look outside of myself. I needed to look out at, like, how am I going to do that? Because I haven't had the strength or the commitment to myself all of these years. So how am I going to make this commitment to him? So I went on a very deep spiritual journey. I found God. God was never lost in my life. I was raised Catholic, so I went to Catholic school. I know all about Jesus. I went to church every Sunday up until like maybe middle school or whatever. So I knew all about God. Like my relationship with him, I was so angry. And that's another thing that I don't think people talk about when it comes to, survivor's guilt is that you're just angry. You're angry not only at what happened, you start to ask yourself, why me? Like you are put in this mindset, and it just kind of keeps you in a trap. So you need to find other things outside of you, whether it's God, a spiritual journey. I started to look at, okay, well, I still have these injuries. I was using these pills all these years. How is my back pain? I just had chronic back pain, and that's why it was so easy for doctors to just give me what I needed. I had, chronic mental health issues. I was depressed. I had crippling anxiety. So they were like, here's some Xanax. Here's this. Oh, you need to sleep. Here's 120, Ambien and Percocets. Like they were just handing me stuff left and right. You have to realize like, okay, well, now I have this pain. How am I going to combat this pain if I need to get sober? Because I've just been using this all this time. So I started really doing a deep dive into how can I heal myself from the inside out. This isn't just emotional. This is physical, this is mental, and this is spiritual, and it's all connected. So I started to, look up creators like Joe Dispenza and got really heavily into just the mind-body, connection and understanding that your thoughts, what does he say? Something like your thoughts create your feelings and your feelings create actions. And so all of those things, when you are aligning all of those things in the right direction, your life changes. So I was on a spiritual journey. I started doing yoga. Meditation was huge. I got into breath work, and I went to therapy a lot and just stayed committed to that type of a program.
Yeah, it's mind, body, and soul.
For sure.
And you talked about at the end there, you start to take action.
Yeah.
And I said this to you downstairs, and watching your interview on Ian's podcast, the amount of service you do and giving back. And you said you go to Kensington and let people who are struggling, homeless, and 90% of the time it's people off their meds, abusing drugs, and you're just giving them that human interaction.
100%.
And that is giving back. That is, I go to meetings, and in the 12th step, it's giving back, and
which is huge for anybody's recovery journey. If they're on something, it's like when you get outside of yourself, and I had no idea how much I was going to love to serve until I actually started to do it. And it fulfills in a selfish way, it sort of fulfills something within you, even though that's not the intention behind it. Your intention is to just let someone know that they're seen and heard. Part of my journey, why it was so troubling for me, was because I never felt seen and I never felt heard. And whenever I would try to talk to people about my story, they got triggered. And so they didn't want me to talk about it because they didn't understand. And I didn't have a way of understanding, like, that there were people out there that did understand, but they weren't in my direct, they weren't in my orbit. So it felt very lonely. But what my point to that is saying, when I got out of myself and I started to care for others and I started to feel grateful and to give back. And so I found the people in Kensington through a friend of mine who lives down there, and he was serving people. And I said, hey, I'd really love to come and help you serve. And these people down there, you're right. Most of the time, 9 times out of 10, they're either off their meds or they're just heavily in that cycle of addiction. And one of the things that didn't help me when I was struggling and trying to get sober is people judging me and trying to tell me exactly what you don't need to do, like shaming me almost. But I don't think that people try and come from a shameful part. It's a point. It's kind of like, you don't have to live like this. You could do this, and I felt berated a lot of times. So when I would go down to see people in Philadelphia, to me, I just want them to feel like they're loved. I just don't think that a lot of them feel seen, feel heard, and feel genuine human compassion from one person to another. So I just go down there, just give them some clothes, give them some food, and listen to them talk and just ask them, maybe a little bit of their story. I don't try to pry too much. I try to just leave it up to them and what they're willing to share. And I try not to give them any advice or anything. Just let them know, hey, like, I get it, and I'm here to listen, especially the women down there, because they've survived a lot. And I think it's a little more difficult for a woman maybe to survive the streets, if you will, and things that they have to do. And, when you have any type of trauma that leads you down the road of addiction, unfortunately, when you're in that cycle, you do a lot of things that compounds that trauma. So now you're just adding layer on top of layer on top, and it just runs so deep, So I think just feeling loved and heard from someone is just planting a seed of something, some compassion, just driving from a place of love. Because that's when I look back to the beginning of my journey and I think about all the people that helped me along the way, it was the kindness, it was the compassion. It was the patience. It was my therapist saying, I see you. And that was life-changing for me, someone to just listen from a non-judgmental place. So I try to give that back because I thought that's what helped me. Those things that I reflected on are the things that got me through day after day. So if I can just do a little bit of that for someone else, it keeps us all going down the right road.
When I first went into treatment, my therapist was just so empathetic with me. And it motivated me. It gave me just the ability to go another day sober in the facility. Yeah. And then I got out. Then I started going to meetings. And then all of these people ran up to me smiling like, hi, I'm so-and-so. Nice to meet you. What's your name? And I'm like, this dude is definitely on Xanax. Like, there's no way he's completely sober. But those little, tidbits of, interaction that I've had with people and that were empathetic towards me and just listened to me and heard me really helped me.
Yeah.
And I say that for the listeners who have a loved one or a friend who is in the grips of addiction. Yeah. Just listen. Hear them. Be there. Yes. Support them. Yes. Don't tell them what to do, because ultimately they're probably suggest, but don't tell them, because when you're ready, you are ready. Exactly. You can't control when you're going to have that spiritual awakening and, change your life. So, and also,
please.
So with the giving back, it filled for me, it wasn't I want to say it wasn't a void. It wasn't just like another symptom of my disease that I was adding to the repertoire of bad in my life, giving back, I like to call it a self-esteemable act because I felt like a piece of shit for so long. I did so many bad things. And I started using drugs at 19. So like you said before, from 1 to 19, all of whatever trauma happened, whatever bad things I did, and then from 19 to 32, when I actually got sober, my mentality when I got sober was back to when I was 19.
Yep.
And I love that you brought that up. And all of those shitty things that I did when I was 17, 18, and then all the things I did to, get drugs or drink and stuff in between stood out. And that trauma, just because it happened 15 years ago, it was still fresh in my head. And I had to build back my self-esteem because I felt less than. I did not feel good enough for anything. And those self-esteemable acts helped me. I started doing good. And then I was able to start looking at myself in the mirror. And I was able to start showing up. And I was able to say, you know what, today I'm worth it. And then tomorrow I would wake up and I'm worth it today. And it would just snowball.
I love that you said that.
Yeah.
It's so true because you do feel like a piece of shit. Every day that you're an addict, you are struggling on the inside with your self-esteem, like you just said, your self-confidence. You know already, like the shame that you feel deep down inside, which is why it doesn't help from the outsiders, your friends or family members that sort of shame you for the decisions that you make. It just further solidifies those insecurities that you already have. So when you said that, it really resonated because it's like, yeah, I was already feeling that way, but on the road to recovery, when you do give back, when you are helping others, you start to have a different narration in your head. Your story, what you're telling yourself starts to change. So you had 15 years, I had 15 years of the same, you're a piece of shit story stuck in our heads. And then all of a sudden you start to do, something nice for someone else and you go, wow, maybe I am a good person. This is who I am. This is actually who I am. All those things that I did before, all of that was just a dark, dark place that I was in. It's not who I am. And so it just starts to turn things over and you start to see yourself in a different light and you go, and it just makes it easier to do the next kind thing. And then you start to see your actual life around you start to change and you think, well, what is it to this karma thing? People always talk about that's karma, and I've had so many years of bad karma that I was like, you know what? I'm going to start, paying it forward. And it's so true and it's so real. And I can't tell people enough, like, you watch your life change when you start to change your actions. You start doing good in the world, you watch. You start feeling grateful, you start feeling abundant. You do all of those things, like you watch the world around you change, and that's just where I am. Yeah.
When you start putting good energy out there and you start doing good things for other people, for society as a whole, people are attracted to that. So when I felt like I was never noticed, when I felt like I wasn't good enough, when I started focusing just on the actions of those self-esteemable acts, then God just started to take care of me.
100%.
And it's funny. Ian said this to me. He's like, I was asking him about the YouTube channel, about a title. He's like, you know what? I just put the titles, and if it goes viral, it goes viral. It goes well, it goes well. I can't control. And I'm like, he's actually right. I'm like, you can't control. Like, I stopped worrying about the results and put the action in. And then before you know it, you're basically turning the dial a couple degrees, right? And it may not make a huge difference right now and today or tomorrow or next week, but a couple years down the road, those few degrees that you change makes all the difference in the world. You're on a completely other side of where you should have been if you didn't make that change.
Absolutely. And I think we were wired for so long for instant gratification because that's what happens in addiction. It's just like you get that instant hit, you get the instant gratification. So coming out of that and understanding that part of life and understanding that when you plant the seeds now, you might not see anything reap for another year and a half. Do you have the patience? But within that patience, you do find God. You do find something, source, the universe, like whatever it is that you believe that's outside of you. You do start to see things like, wow, okay, I might have planted that seed 6 months ago or a year ago, but I'm being taken care of. Like it actually is. Maybe like you said about control, you just let go of that control, and you just like God's got me. I've got me, And when you start to feel like you trust yourself again, then then other people can trust you too. So it's like you said, what you put out in the world. When you start doing good in the world, it comes back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you take us through kind of the last few months of your addiction and up to when you were able to surrender and you turned your life around and ultimately found abstinence and sobriety?
Yeah. So when like I said, I got sent to the psych ward. I completely lost all perception of reality. I just had no idea where I was, like what was going. I didn't understand what was the difference between reality and not anymore. So I went there, and I remember just kind of waking up and being surrounded by all these people who also had just as many issues and trauma and crazy stories as me. And I thought, we're all just trying to do our best here. Everybody's just trying to do their best. But I think going back to what I said earlier, like my son, that was the moment that I needed to decide, is this going to be the person he grows up having as a mother? I made that choice in the hospital. I have to do better for him. I am not going to be the mother who is, off and on sober. I'm not going to be the mom that he sees, drinking to whatever. Like, he deserves better. He deserves better. And I don't want him also to grow up thinking that, like, going in and out of the hospital, like, I just don't want that life for him. And I thought, if there's anything that I can possibly do to make sure that he gets the life he deserves, I'm going to do it. And that was the driving force. And for the first year or so, I would say, he was that, I just kept thinking, how am I going to do it for him? Because I was never strong enough to want to do it for myself. For some reason, that baby saved my life. He was 3 years old when I went to the hospital. That was all I needed, though, to know. But then after time, a year or so after that, I started to realize, I'm doing this for me, too. I'm just as deserving, and I deserve this just as much as he does, But that was the driving force. And within that journey, I found God, and I just realized that all these years I was so mad at God. And I thought, what was I mad at? Was I mad at myself? What was it? So mindset, all of that had to change. I started to just implement different, like I said, with breathing exercises and yoga and meditation and a lot. Yeah.
So pain is the greatest motivator. And what was the rock bottom, your most painful moment that motivated you to really go and admit? Because look, at the end of the day, you're an adult. You don't have to go to a psych ward if you don't want to.
Right.
What was really that driving force deep down that said, you know what, I'm going to go into a psych ward?
No, actually, I didn't choose to go to the psych ward.
You got carried in.
That was out of my control, too. So I lost pretty much, I don't want to say this wrong, but how it was described to me is I sort of lost my rights to choose at that point. They turned to my husband at the time. So I ended up calling the police on myself. The police show up. They have a conversation with my ex-husband, and they were like, she is not well. You need to take her to the hospital. I fought it every step of the way. He had to kind of convince me with a lie by saying that I'm going to take you to the hospital so that you can get your refills. That's what got me in the car, because that's what I thought I was going to get. I thought I was going to get a prescription. So I still was fighting to that bitter end that, I'm fine. But they clearly did an evaluation, and they were like, she needs, to go and be admitted to a hospital. And so they turned to him because I was not capable of making any sound choices. They had a psychiatrist come in and evaluate me. I was not of sound mind enough to do that, so they turned to him. He made that decision. And it was the best decision for me at the time because I would have fought it to the very bitter end. You get stuck in this, I'm fine. It's everybody else around me that has an issue. That's the mindset that I had at the time. It was, I don't know what you guys are you guys are the crazy ones. I'm fine. I don't need any help. And I couldn't have been more wrong. It was a very humbling experience.
Yeah. And I do love that in the beginning you said, my son needed a mother. And I think it's important for the listener to know in the beginning, you have a lot of programs that preach God, higher power, this and that. Whatever keeps you going in the beginning, it doesn't matter. Just keep going.
Yes.
Just keep pursuing recovery.
Yes.
And then eventually it'll get you.
Yeah.
In a great way.
In a wonderful way. It's amazing. I mean, my son being the driving force of that was because I knew what the alternative was. What's the alternative? If I don't get my life together, he's going to grow up with a mother that looks like this, or he's going to grow up with no mother at all. That was the alternative. And it's like that to me was just enough. So you're right. I just kept showing up. If it wasn't for me at first, it was for him. And I just kept going to therapy. I just didn't give up on myself so that I didn't give up on him. And then over time, it was, okay, I'm actually doing this for me and for everybody that's in my orbit and in my circle, every family member. And my relationships with every single person in my family has all improved. Like, I didn't realize how much of a all the healthy, unhealthy relationships I had with all of my family members and friends, I didn't realize how much I was the problem. It's not until you start to look inside like, it is all me. You start to take accountability and understand the part you play in all of those unhealthy dynamics with people. And so when you start to change and you start to shift that dynamic to more of something healthy, then you start to understand like, these relationships can be healthy. And so the relationship I have now with my mom, with my brother, my entire friend circle has completely changed. But all the relationships I have with my coworkers, everything has just been so much better. I mean, night and day. I don't even recognize my old life. That's how much it has changed.
That's wild. Yeah. It's crazy how you make a full, complete change like that. You need to change everything in your life when, and I'm obviously speaking from experience, when you need to do an overhauling of your entire life, change all of your old ways of thinking. When, finding recovery and getting off drugs and alcohol, you're so accustomed to that. And it's wild because it took me years to change my attitude towards friends, change my behaviors, because there were some behaviors that I was still taking part in when I got sober, and it was making me feel like shit still. I was basically a dry drunk.
Totally.
Just abstinent from drugs and alcohol, going to meetings, but not really following what they're saying and, not taking suggestions.
Yeah. And I mean, you can take the substance away all you want, but if you don't actually change the behaviors and the actions surrounding it, like you said, it's like a dry drunk. You're still behaving and acting in the same exact ways. And then really what is changing other than just taking away the substance, So it's a lot. And I don't think people in recovery get nearly as much credit of how hard it is. So, and family members and friends just don't understand. I mean, it's one thing to change a behavior. It's one thing to do some sort of self-reflection and understand, okay, I want to change this. This isn't working for me when you're a sober person. But when you have been using for so long and then all of a sudden you take those drugs and alcohol away and then you decide to change a behavior, you literally have to start from the bottom up. Like, you start from nothing. And for people to overcome, I just want to give them their roses for anybody who's listening in recovery, because they're some of the strongest people that I know. The people that have overcome addiction, any type of substance use disorder, any type of mental health challenges they are the strongest people. They have a soul within them that you just don't see like everybody else. They are fighters, they are survivors, and they are they create the most change in the world that I've personally seen. Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful process.
Yeah, it is.
So you have changed clearly in the last 7 years.
Yeah.
What do you do today on a daily basis to keep your mental health at its peak?
Okay. Every single day I get up, I do yoga. You also probably spend about a half hour to an hour a day in some sort of meditation. It doesn't have to look to a lot of people like you're in a perfect position and you have your hands in a perfect position. A lot of people think that when it comes to meditation. I'm like, just self-reflect, man. Like, just look within and just evaluate, how did the day go? How can I be grateful? If I don't incorporate some sort of gratitude practice on a daily, if not weekly basis, I'm all thrown off. I start to get way back into that mindset of, I start becoming a victim. I start looking at the things that I don't have. I become in that lack mindset that I used to. And when I realize that, I realize, okay, let's get back to the basics here. Let me go back to a gratitude journal and start just mapping out everything that I'm grateful for from the basics. Like, people, sometimes we get caught up with society and in comparison to others, especially with social media. I read one day that comparison is the thief of joy, and that really resonated, because when you're scrolling on social media, you see the highlights of everybody's life, and they seem to all have it together. And you start to compare yourself. When you take a step back from that and you look at, I've got a roof over my head, just the basics. And I think that's what helps too when you do service work. When I go down there and I see people living on the streets in Philadelphia, they're living in a tent. I have a roof over my head. How many times do we really, really stop and look at that and be grateful for that? Sure, we have bills to pay. Sure, we have debt. Sure, we have all that stuff that is not going to go away tomorrow. Like, it's still the grind. But when you see that, gratitude alone has changed my life. So I incorporate yoga, meditation, a gratitude practice. Even breathing exercises. I have to listen to all inspirational and motivational stuff. I can't get caught up with watching anything that provokes any type of anxiety. So like the news, shows that are just really dramatic that don't add value to my life. I had to stop all that because it's not doing anything for me. A lot. So all of that, and plus the service work. I just like to give back. I like to share my story in hopes that if one person out there hears this and it makes their day a little bit brighter, that to me is, it's all worth it. So what I've gone through, if one person can come out of that and say, wow, if she can do it, then I can do it. Or that story I heard, her share, and I've been through something similar. Oh, maybe I'm not alone. And yeah.
Social media is toxic.
Yeah.
The news, toxic. There's a narrative that, people individually are trying to control on social media, and then news stations on TV. So,
and they feed you fear. Everything is fear.
Yep.
I never felt, when you take a step back from that, you realize that's the narrative that they're pushing. They're just pushing fear. They want society to just be stuck. We don't have to be afraid of anything, So I totally get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. I do it for work now, social media and like my accounts and whatnot, but I had to take a major step back from social media, from a social individual standpoint, and like my personal account.
Yeah.
Because it was creating unmanageability in my head. Comparing takes the joy out of things. And then I slip into, I am not good enough. And I don't make as much money as him. I'm not as much of a family man as him. I'm not. So it's perception.
It is.
And
And when you start to compare yourself to other people, I have learned, if I sit back and start comparing, I'm not doing as well as that person. I'm not as successful. Look at how much they've grown in a year. Why am I not there? And then you understand we are all on such a different journey. We all live in a different area. We're all juggling different things. I'm a mother. I'm a single mom now. I have a 9-year-old. Maybe that person who's doing so, quote unquote, in my mind, better than me because they've, accomplished what they did in just a short period of time. Why am I not getting there? But maybe they don't have a child to take care of, and I do. So you have to learn to give yourself a little bit of grace, and you have to cultivate as much patience with yourself, and just know to keep showing up for yourself, keep planting those seeds, just keep at it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you started a business with your son? Tell me about
Did
this.
you hear that on Ian's podcast?
Of course I did.
Yeah.
No, this is awesome, though.
Thank you.
You are a mother to your son. You are active in his life, and you guys are doing cool shit together. So I want to hear it.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, so he purchased a bracelet off. I actually bought him just a beaded bracelet on the internet for his birthday, and it had all different stones that meant different things.
Okay.
And so when he got it in the mail, like, he loved it. And so he had it for a month and it broke and he was devastated. He's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So I looked at the beads and I'm like, dude, I bet we could I'll buy the beads and the string and we'll just start making them. So I did. And so we got them in the mail. He's like, well, how do we string these along? I'm like, oh, I have no idea, but YouTube is going to tell us. So we YouTube a quick video on how to make a bracelet, and we did. So like maybe a couple days after that, he goes, I bet you we could like make these. I'm like, yeah, and I bet you could sell them. Maybe your friends would want them. So he did. He made a bunch of them. He gets on the bus that day. I see him get on the bus, and I look at him through the window, and he's taking all the beads off of his wrist, and he's like waving them around to his little friends. He gets off the bus later. He was like, Mom, a couple of my friends want some bracelets. I'm like, okay, how much are you going to tell them? He goes, oh, I got to charge them. I'm like, well, sure, if we're going to sell them. So then we were going back with like that. This kid has learned the art of negotiation, because he said to his friend, like, I'll give them to you. He goes back to school. I'll give you the bracelets, and this is how much they're going to be. Oh, the friend said, I thought that they were for free. So he had to understand, like, learn how to stick to his guns. I said, hey, listen, you can give them away for free, but they're not really free, are they? Because we spent money on. So he learns just like the basics of business, really. Mm-hmm. And it was really interesting. So I was doing like a lot of the marketing for it. Like, I was posting a lot on social media. We were getting orders. I was taking them to the post office with me. We're writing out everybody's addresses and shipping them out. So
Little hustler at 9 years old.
Little hustler at 9.
All right.
Yeah.
He's going to go real far. Sales guy. Yeah. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So if you could go back to the Nicole a few weeks before you got sober, so call it 7 years ago, roughly, who was trying to get sober or wanted to for their son or their child or for a loved one, what advice would you have for that person?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think going back to what you were saying before, you find what you have to find a will, and you have to just stick with it. And if you have a will, if that seed is planted within you, it's there for a reason. Just follow it, and just know that you're going to have slip-ups. There is no perfect looking recovery. So if you try this day and you fail, it's okay. Try again. And just keep trying, because eventually it will stick. It will. I mean, I tried quitting drinking alcohol. I can't even count how many times. And it was just a will that I had, that I knew I wanted this. I knew it, and I didn't give up. And so that's the thing, just like we always say, one day at a time. It's not always one day at a time. It's 1 second at a time, 1 minute at a time. Because sometimes it's really hard to get through that minute. And then it gets a little bit easier. You get through that minute, you get through the next one, and then it gets a little easier. So, yeah.
No, that's amazing. One thing I do want to add, with failure and relapse, I started coming around probably to meetings 3 years before I got sober. And I made a decision to go out and use again. And things got 10 times worse, and I'm lucky that I'm still here.
Wow.
So I think it's very important for the people listening. Look, it's not a perfect program, but if there is relapse, you are running the risk of losing your life, because I almost did. And I'm just speaking from experience, and I just wanted to pass that along as well. So beautifully said. And Nicole, thank you so much for everything. I appreciate you taking the drive and coming on.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Kevin. It was great.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you.